Hello and welcome to a presentation on the Council Roadside Environment Management Framework. This presentation is of interest to councils in New South Wales considering applying for grants under the Council Roadside Reserve project. The project is funded by Environmental Trust and applications for this grant close on the 27th of April 2017. You'll find more information on the grant guidelines, the application forms and the full technical report and supporting documents on Local Government New South Wales website. My name is Sophie Powrie and I work for Ecological Australia. We were engaged to develop the framework in response to perceived barriers to consistent and long-term improvements in environmental management of roadsides. Today I'd like to give you a presentation that provides a quick overview of the framework and to assist councils in identifying grant projects that are relevant to their needs and the project objectives. So a bit about the context. This piece of work is designed to leverage and advance previous work done by councils and others in managing roadside environments in New South Wales. There is a significant body of work done by the Roads and Maritime Services, the New South Wales Roadside Environment Committee, organisations of councils and individual councils. With this previous work, there has still been a variable capacity and uptake, and previous investments by the Environmental Trust have identified there remain a number of barriers to effective and long-term roadside management. Some of these challenges are inherent management procedures, separation of staff responsibilities, and funding consistency. Stakeholders also highlighted the need to embed roadside environmental management into Council's integrated planning and reporting framework for it to be factored into the forward resourcing strategy undertaken by each council. IPNR aligns Council's policies, strategic planning, resource strategy, delivery program, operational program and annual reporting to community values and to Council's legal responsibilities. So that means reserve management under this framework must align to community values and to Council's legal obligations. Many councils start the IPNR process with community consultation. And there are often two big standout topics. Provision of road infrastructure in support of economic activity rates highly amongst most councils. And also maintaining a healthy and productive environment are strong community concerns. Activities that benefit and reflect your community values are more likely to attract investment. You'll see the framework steps through a logical sequence of vertically integrated plans to deliver on community concerns. An important aspect for forward resourcing is to put the roadside environment into the same management system as the built road itself. Aligning management of all assets in the road reserve, built and natural, affords a streamlined process and should help identify cost savings. There are a number of stakeholders in the roadside space, and Council manages a large portion of the 2.5 million hectares of roadside reserve in New South Wales. Other key players: Roads and Maritime Services, Local Land Services, the Rural Fire Service for fire and emergency planning, community stakeholders, ratepayers, and adjacent landholders. And all of these interplay in the management of road reserves, particularly for geographic continuity. And I note here that some councils in New South Wales are party to RMCC contracts with RMS, and contractual arrangements may apply that supersede this framework. So a little bit about why councils should care about this issue. Firstly, Council is obliged. Council is obliged to avoid detrimental impacts to the environment through its actions and decisions. That is a legal requirement. In addition to avoiding loss, Council is also required to protect environmental values on public land under Section 36E of the Local Government Act. Secondly, where it is possible to streamline delivery, this enables council to deliver services and a broader scope of services without necessarily adding to the bottom line. And thirdly, roadside vegetation can be extremely important. Now, not all roadside vegetation stands a high conservation value, but many of them are. Roadside vegetation, if you stop and think about it, provides connectivity, it provides visual amenity, there are safety features for drivers and other services, and in cleared landscapes, whether that's urban or rural, they can provide critical habitat as well. Roadside vegetation has been found to contribute to reducing road accidents by decreasing headlight glare, reducing driver monotony, and highlighting road delineation. As well, there are environmental benefits. There's also productivity benefits to maintaining healthy roadside vegetation. In rural localities, roadside vegetation has been found to benefit adjacent agricultural production by providing shelter belts and reducing salinity encroachment. And finally, scenic amenity contributes to a sense of place for residents and visitors alike. So the framework is designed to provide a strategic pathway for managing roadside environments, to link into IPNR, to find cost savings and opportunities for greater service delivery, to provide capacity building in key areas where stakeholders indicated that was necessary, to inform proper environmental impact assessment procedures where they're not already in place, and to support the collection of improved environmental data for managing this asset. The aim is to integrate roadside management into Council's other asset management and planning procedures, leading to improved environmental outcomes. There are some key fundamentals to improving strategic management of roadsides within the framework. And it has been emphasised time and time again, it is necessary to use data-driven evidentiary base for planning natural resource management. And secondly, Council must address its risk exposure to non-compliance with legislative responsibilities. So this is what the framework looks like. It's built on the classic IPNR pathway. The diagram shows each step of managing roadside values within the IPNR process. And councils have multiple duties to balance. They have a duty to serve the community vision. That is the beginning of the IPNR process. They have a duty to comply with the legislation. That is at the top of the IPNR process. They have a duty to comply with legislation, state policy requirements and other plans. And in addition, in that orange box on the right, they have a duty to exercise financial responsibilities, the all-important resourcing strategy. So the framework that we have developed provides an overarching strategy. The grant is open to applications that can apply for aspects of this framework. It is not expected that all councils will undertake the framework in its entirety. All councils are different, have different capacities, and are at different levels of development through their roadside management. So it is expected that grant applications will be tailored to address your specific gaps. As I said earlier, there's a copy of the full technical report and support materials on Local Government New South Wales websites, and that's designed for you to jumpstart your internal dialogue. The framework concepts can be applied and the tools adapted to your own operational context. At the end of the grant process, Local Government New South Wales will be sitting down with members and ascertaining which tools are required and what aspects can be further developed for distribution and rollout around the state. Now, key for the Environmental Trust investors is to generate evidence of how the work that you plan to undertake will improve integration into council systems and will deliver long-term environmental outcomes. Lessons, both successful and otherwise, are valid. So now I'd like to step you through some of the framework and possible project ideas. As in the IPNR process, the legislative context in which council is operating must be considered. So this provides a logical place to start. We have received feedback in early consultation that a key driver for changed practices is to reduce council's risk exposure, and this message came directly from senior council management. So consider if you need a project to review and revamp your environmental impact assessment procedures as they apply to linear reserves. Do your staff understand their legal obligations with respect to road safety and to environmental protection? It's a key area to realise improved environmental outcomes as it can avoid inadvertent impacts. If you do not have sufficient EIA processes, you might unwittingly allow for unmoderated clearing of an EEC, for example, due to lack of consideration of environmental factors. The law can be complex, so the technical report contains some advice to unpack this a little. These are some of the tools. Now, RMS recommend in their environmental assessment procedures that all potential impacts be assessed to a staged assessment process. And by staged, I mean stepwise approach that scales up commensurate with the magnitude of impacts of work. The challenge for councils is to balance the many legal obligations that apply. So it's not simply the Roads Act and the Biodiversity Conservation Act. You must also consider the Water Management Act, and there are numerous other acts, and the list goes on. So I've included a quote here from the Roads Act and prosecution of council by way of example that there is a legal precedence at play. On the left, the Roads Act, and on the right, the court case. This court case refers to the prosecution of council and a senior council manager with significant costs incurred to both. The legal precedents may be handy if your council is still not convinced of the need to change its current practice in respect to how it delivers decisions on roadside environments. The framework contains a lookup table of legislation and an example of staged EIA. It's got a template REF for you to use and adapt if you don't already have one, and a number of tools to support councils in diligently improving procedures for long-term environmental outcomes. So it's important, and it cannot be underemphasised, that you've got these competing legislative duties. The Roads Act, and I've got section 88 there, which states a road authority may, despite any act or law to the contrary, remove or lop any tree that is on or overhanging a public road if it is necessary to do so for safety. And yet you also have there a breach, a successful litigation of council for not complying with environmental considerations and planning in due process. So there is a lot of technical detail, and you will need to gain your own legal advice. The framework simply puts forward the considerations for what is current at the time of writing and what needs to be considered for the steps to improve your own EIA process. As well as legislation, in New South Wales, we've got the SEPP, the Infrastructure SEPP, which will identify types of issues that require assessment. It's really important to understand that not undertaking or inadequately undertaking environmental impact assessment poses a serious risk. So your system needs adequate flags for referral for environmental assessment if the road or roadworks are near significant features, core habitats, valuable vegetation, water, matters of national environmental significance, and so on. Now, another project idea or an area that you may be interested in, and this is essentially another approach to resolving the same inconsistent interpretation of council's multiple duties, would be to develop and formally adopt an organisation policy position. A roadside environmental management policy is a statement which underpins how roadside environment management issues will be dealt with in your organisation. It may be a separate adopted policies, or it may be a statement in your road strategy. It should provide clear indication, internally and externally, of council's expectations in areas of high environmental value in your roadside reserves. Policy is a neat mechanism because it is a means of addressing consistency across multiple council responsibilities. A good policy will identify a key position that is responsible for implementing the policy and its relationship to other plans and policies held by your council. If it's a separate policy, it must also go through the formal adoption process by elected representatives, and therein lies some consultation and education process as well. Now, we realise that councils have a diverse array of approaches to road network management, and consultation indicated a strong interest in how peers are approaching this issue. So in the compendium, the resource compendium of the technical report, there are examples of Kyogo's road management system, work done by Hunter Councils, RMS and Moringa Council. And these may be of use to you when reviewing your own systems. Now, another project area, and as I said, this is a very important one actually, is investing in data. Your current information on roadside assets is a useful management tool. The purpose of investing in data is to, one, identify all your roadside values and which ones are important. Your roadside values include vegetation type, fauna, connectivity, condition, heritage, and so on. The second objective for collecting roadside environmental data is to minimise council's risk and therefore legal breach through inadvertent damage from routine maintenance works. And thirdly, to be able to prioritise your efforts of conservation works and target areas for maximum gain, bearing in mind that roadsides form one part of your broader natural resource management obligations, requirements, responsibilities. The conservation significance of a roadside might be derived from its composition, its structure, or landscape values, and there are several scales at which this can be addressed. So there's a chapter in the technical report and a PowerPoint presentation that describes the steps to identify and prioritise areas of higher conservation value. You might need to do this at one of three scales: an LGA-wide assessment, at a road reach or road stretch, or within significant sites. And there's an adaptation for each of these. The framework also includes standard field sheets that were developed separately by a separate project by LLS in partnership with Local Government New South Wales and others. This has parallel funding and it facilitates, I guess, a greater consistency between LLS and councils when it comes to the collection of roadside data, so that roadsides in future can be managed irrespective of tenure or your council boundary. There's a separate technical report completed and on Local Government New South Wales website outlining the rapid assessment tool in more detail, and a brief summary of that is also in the framework technical report. So with a solid foundation of data, managers are then able to plan more effectively. The framework includes updated template for a roadside vegetation management plan, and the key update in this template, beyond the foundation work that has been previously done by the New South Wales Roadside Environment Committee and others, are the links to Council's other strategic plan, delivery plan and operational plan. If Council already has an RVMP, it may warrant review and adaptive updates. And of course, one final thing I'd like to say around data is that data collection alone is only one part of the equation. Effective and timely delivery of that data to the relevant staff on the ground who are executing the work orders, who are undertaking the planning or designing the new infrastructure upgrades, is critical for the effectiveness in delivering overall environmental improvements. That's an example of the pro forma. And as I said, it's documented separately. There are actually three field sheets, one for grassland, shrubland, woodland. It's not dissimilar to the concepts from biodiversity assessment methods, but it is very much simplified so it can be used by a variety of staff. You will need to be able to identify what vegetation type you're in when using it, but it then goes on to factor in the landscape context, condition and habitat to derive a conservation ranking. The Inform ranking is designed to be quick and therefore cost effective, and it will provide you with a rough guide on the relative patch conservation significance compared with other sites assessed by the same method. There's also places in there for recording the weeds, the status and other management information. So the landscape context recorded on this sheet is tenure blind. So the road reserve that we're talking about is often 20 metres wide on either side of the road, the hard road surface itself. But the vegetation patch, of course, will extend irrespective of tenure and may extend onto adjacent land. So we're talking about assessing the value of the roadside patch as it belongs to a broader patch. Of course, in cleared landscapes, narrow patches will come up as significant because of the lack of alternatives in the landscape. So another project area, if you're still looking for project ideas at this stage, is in natural asset management in roadside reserves. Following the IP&R into the resourcing strategy and the delivery plan, a useful mechanism for aligning asset maintenance is to trial the inclusion of roadside assets alongside the built asset system. So asset management cycles are already enacted by councils. Some councils already hold a natural asset register, but many haven't put the two together, and the functionality of that for managing roadsides is the key here. The purpose is to recognise roadside reserves within the asset management system. And an example project might be to apply for funds to map natural assets in roadside reserves, to integrate that data into the asset management system, to define the unit of value, its price and replacement cost, and an indicative maintenance routine for the asset class. Now there's further detail on this in the technical report, but to reiterate, the valuing and managing of natural assets within IP&R principles is actually a new and emerging area. There was a lot of interest from stakeholders when we spoke to them, and the substantial benefit in sharing knowledge gained in this area between councils. So I think whilst this concept applies to natural resource management more broadly, there's a lot of interest in this concept specifically as it applies to roadside. So while roadside infrastructure might be considered a built asset, the roadside reserve containing vegetation and other natural features may be considered a natural asset. Within a local government strategic planning framework, areas of biodiversity are considered as natural assets. And natural assets can be defined as soil, water, plants, animals from which ecosystem services flow to provide cultural, financial and ecological benefits. Now, natural assets will appreciate with management over time, and in contrast, built assets will depreciate more slowly over time. Built assets will eventually require replacement, and arguably natural assets cannot be replaced. Now there are different ways of approaching this, quantitative and qualitatively, and there's a lot more depth in the technical report. And if you're interested, I refer you to chapter 2.5, which outlines how other councils are approaching the challenge and provides examples from some of these councils from their asset dashboards. So for those councils who are more interested in physical works, the framework addresses implementation in a number of ways. And this slide shows 3 example projects that will improve on-ground outcomes. The first is essentially cost savings realised by clustering works, coordinating roadside works by location, rather than by sectional responsibilities or some other aspect. For example, a case study of coordinated weed control trialled in the mid-coast found that council halved the traffic control, shared the chemical costs and doubled the area covered by the same works crew when they simply had the weed teams and the road furniture maintenance schedule aligned. And all this by simply taking the managers collaborating and coordinating those work plans. So this example illustrates how improved service delivery can be achieved, and weeds are a chronic problem in roadsides. To further exacerbate the weed management issues that council faces, noxious weeds are funded separately to environmental weeds, and both of them co-occur with native vegetation remnants that might be a priority. So you can see here within a roadside reserve project, you've actually got the ability to achieve all of those outcomes whilst looking after your built road surface and the road furniture around it. A second project area that might be of interest is to plan and manage on-ground activities. These are conservation works in priority reserves. We gain some feedback from talking to councils that suggest there is a need to increase council staff capacity to manage conservation areas. And there are a number of ways that you could do this. You could have a reserve management plan written in collaboration with external expertise and educating council staff in the process. You might look to conducting joint field days and drawing on council's internal expertise across the different sections and local land services or other stakeholders, for example. And so it goes. So the framework contains numerous references to assist in managing biodiversity and road projects, including the RMS guidelines and a very neat piece of work that I can recommend to you from Mid-Western Regional Council. There are also quite a few references for issue-specific things that may come up in relation to managing conservation, and that's in the appendix, the resource compendium. Now, a third project example is to undertake a review of your current operational practice. Does your council have and adhere to standard operating procedures for simple measures to prevent harm to environment and to protect natural assets? Things like preventing the spread of weeds, or avoiding damage to habitat trees, or flags in the system that will elevate site issues to the appropriate officer in a timely manner. And these simple measures can give large cost savings by reducing future threat. That's significant for council's bottom line. So you may think that there's projects that are warranted in reviewing council's operating procedures when it comes to roadside management. Now, to bring about real change in your council, your project must consider all of the internal positions that potentially impact roadside outcomes. The framework recommends you define delegation for the overall coordination. And you'll remember that a separation of roles was identified as an impediment to improved environmental management in roadsides. So this project clearly is not going to restructure your council. Instead, you're going to be able to use this opportunity to have an internal discussion, to define responsibilities, to define and identify collaborations, as well as practical things like scheduling of works and EIA procedures and referral procedures to reduce inadvertent impacts. So I'll leave you with the question, who assesses effectiveness of delivery in your organisation, and is there a need for an internal project revamping governance? Now, careful planning is required before any works are undertaken in roadside vegetation, and the framework supports efforts to reduce inappropriate road maintenance practices. And in that space, it's also worth considering external contractors. Do they have the right qualifications? Do they have access to the right information? Or is it worth delineating high conservation areas with signage, for example, so that it is very obvious when they are working in sensitive areas? Now, there are existing RMS guidelines for a range of construction and maintenance activities, and the technical report and compendium of tools includes references and some training slides on the use of environmental data, checklists and safeguards. So these are available to you when you apply for your grant. So to recap, the framework systematically follows each step of IP&R, and councils need to reflect on which elements of the framework will most benefit their organisational requirements and deliver improved environmental outcomes and lead to genuine integration of roadside, the unloved poor cousin of natural resource management, into your key roadwork maintenance schedules. Key for the Environmental Trust investors is to see that evidence of long-term outcomes and improved integration. So it's worth just mentioning MERI, monitoring and review, is an important part of any management cycle because it allows councils to learn from their experience, to demonstrate successful outcomes of monitoring and adapt. So that's inherent in IP&R. It also clearly applies to grant applications. And a reminder that it is worthwhile being very clear in the outcomes and outputs that you are aiming to achieve, as this will help strengthen your grant application and project management. And here this slide shows 3 prime considerations: the environmental outcomes, the landscape goals, and the procedural improvements that you might be working towards. So that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'd like to thank Local Government New South Wales for the opportunity to work on this project. It certainly was an intriguing puzzle to piece together all of the facets of our daily work of impact assessment, mapping, veg management plans, bush regen, stakeholder collaboration and strategic planning into a vertically integrated framework. We welcome feedback and we strongly recommend continual improvement. And most of all, we wish you luck in your own projects. Thank you.